We're going to be talking about how campaigning has influenced transport in the next hour, and we've got a number of fantastic guests lined up. Roger from Reclaim the Streets, Rosalind, who is standing as a mayoral candidate for London, Brenda, who has made some fantastic parklets in Hackney and some Tactical Urbanistas as well, and Arlan, who is involved with Extinction Rebellion Action Planners group, and myself, I'm Caspar. I have been involved with Stop Killing Cyclists for a number of years. I was a cycle courier, ran a cycling events company. That's my way into Stop Killing Cyclists, and then Stop Killing Cyclists was my way into Extinction Rebellion. I'm quite an experienced campaigner, have run numerous national campaigns, have managed to get the road outside my daughter's primary school in Tower Hamlets shrunk down to a small one-way road to stop the kids from facing the danger of traffic every single day. And with Stop Killing Cyclists, we've been desperately trying to get the government to spend a significant amount on cycling, which the UN said in 2016 that the government should be spending £6 billion a year. And right now, this second, the government are talking in billions of pounds. So that, you know, this always make the most of a crisis is what I've been told. And this tragic crisis has got a silver lining, and the transport might be the silver lining. And the reason that transport is so important to Extinction Rebellion is that the transport sector is the largest emitting CO2 sector in the UK. I'm speaking from Exeter, and in the West Country, transport is also the largest emitting sector, as it is nationally. So there are a lot of gains to be made from transport sector in the UK. And we're going to go over to our first guest now to introduce himself, which is Roger from Reclaim the Streets. Over to you, Roger.
Thank you, Caspar, and thank you, Extinction Rebellion, for inviting me to do this talk. It's a real pleasure to do this. Let me just very briefly introduce myself. I'm Roger. My day job is working for Cycling UK as policy director. So my day job is to sort of, as it were, mainstream campaigning to get the government to spend more funding and to put better policies in place to make sure that our roads and streets are designed to be cycle friendly, and that the law helps make it normal for people to cycle for day-to-day travel as well as for leisure. But I also have a history of involvement in grassroots activism, in road protest, in Reclaim the Streets, and various activities since then, right through to Extinction Rebellion. 25 years ago exactly today, at exactly this time, I was one of a group of people from Reclaim the Streets who was organising a street party, allegedly, of course, in Camden High Street, and I will have a little bit to say about that. What I want to do in 10 minutes, if I can, well, I'm told it's now 8 minutes, so I'm really going to have to canter slightly, so apologies for this, is to give a bit of the background to what Reclaim the Streets, what the context in which Reclaim the Streets came into being, what we did, why we were doing it, and what is relevance today. So I hope that this will take you into a presentation. Right, are you right? Hopefully you're seeing an introductory slide. So that was a poster for one of our street parties. The background, I said I'd start with the background. I'm going to go back a little more than 25 years to 1989. Two things happened that year. Mrs. Thatcher, who's then the Prime Minister, went to the United Nations and said that as a scientist, she was absolutely convinced of the need to take urgent action on climate change. And she made this speech, which was credited with kind of massively raising awareness of climate change at that time. Yet, paradoxically, that very same year, her government launched what her ministers described as the largest road building program since the Romans. And Margaret Thatcher herself said, "Nothing can stop the great car economy." That was a phrase that we had some things to say about a few years later. That road building program spawned a whole wave of road protests, starting at Twyford Down, where people jumped on bulldozers, getting past security guards to jump onto the tops of bulldozers to slow down and try and prevent this massive gash of a motorway being gouged out through what was a site of special scientific interest in the edge of a national park area of outstanding natural beauty, but it wasn't protected. And that provided inspiration for a whole series of road protests throughout the country. A year later, there were road protests all over the place, culminating with the Newbury Bypass campaign, which really was spectacular in terms of the elaborate tree defences, tree houses and rope walkways between them to make it really difficult for the Department of Transport's bailiffs to evict the tree protests. I want to focus on the campaign that I was most involved in the middle of that. Well, it was actually the sort of one that immediately followed on from Twyford Down. This was the No Lemon Link campaign in East London. It was an area of outstanding lack of natural beauty, apart from this wonderful sweet chestnut tree, 250 years old. And when we built what was the road protest movement's first tree house and got it declared in court to be a dwelling in law, and therefore they had to evict it, they had to bring, as you can see, about 500 police officers at 5 a.m. To evict one tree, and it took them a whole day to evict a tree house. That really gave us an incredible start to what then turned into a whole year's campaigning, which culminated, and the relevant bit of this was the defence of Claremont Road. Claremont Road was a single street, just three sides of a rectangle coming off a main road, running alongside it for a bit, and then turning back onto that main road, just giving access to these houses, this row of terrace houses that was condemned to make way for the M11 link road. We set it up effectively as our last line of defence. We had decorations. It became basically car-free, entirely squatted, and it was an amazing sort of sense of party atmosphere, as well as entirely practical defences to make sure that by the end of it, there were nets above the streets connecting the houses to the trees, and then you can see that 100-foot high scaffold tower that forced the Department of Transport to send in bailiffs that took 4 days to evict this street. But it was that idea that what happens when you turn a street car-free that really gave us the idea to do something, how to carry on beyond road protest. Because really, by the time we'd done this, we'd won the argument against road building. There was a very clear public sense that road building was bad for the natural environment, for homes, for people's lungs, and indeed for the climate. People could still remember that Margaret Thatcher speech at this time. And we'd sort of won the argument. 2 years later, that 24 billion road building programme had been cut to 1.5 billion 1.5 billion. Basically, Twyford Down, Newbury, M11 were the noisy defeats that enabled a huge number of quiet victories at other places around the country, where any local group could basically sort of say, we're going to join in with direct action if we don't get our roads stopped, and most of them won. So how do we then move on from roads to cars? Because roads is what the government does, and everyone loves to hate the government. Cars is much more kind of personal to the wider public. Well, this idea that a street could be, if it's car-free, it can be a party and you can enjoy it, and it can be a place where children can play. It was sort of born on Claremont Road, which is why I spent a bit of time dwelling on that. So this gave us this idea. Oh, there's some photos of the actual eviction of Claremont Road, and there's Brenda, a night on the tiles, we might say. That was actually probably about a night of spending a night on the roofs of Claremont Road before getting evicted. So we had this idea that we could move on from tackling roads to tackling cars by creating car-free space in what was a busy high street. The first one, as I say, was 25 years ago, precisely today. We met at a squatted church in Kentish Down in North London. The party goers didn't know where they were going. In fact, they just got on the tube. They went one tube stop up the line to Camden Town. As the first party goers were about to emerge from the tube station, two clapped out old cars that we bought from a breaker's yard came out of two opposite side roads on opposite sides of Camden High Street. They crashed into one another, and then to the shock of the bystanders, the drivers got out of their cars and started smashing each other's cars up. This was in fact street theatre designed to create car-free space for a party. There we have, that's what the party looked like. And of course, those two smashed out cars just provided somewhere really wonderful for the children to play for the rest of the day. The idea that children could play was a really important part of those early street parties. We were, again, as I've said there, against roads, cars and the bodies that push them. And we had this phrase, because cars can't fight. And it really kind of spoke to this idea that what happens when you start imagining what else you can do with street space. You can play, you can plant things. Our second street party blocked with its tripod, which basically meant that the police couldn't get someone down very quickly. But we also made sure that the road was rapidly filled with sand, sand, again, for the children to be able to play. Just imagine a street as something other than a place full of cars. And this was sort of our most ambitious of those early street parties. Really, 7,000 or 8,000 people on what was then a motorway, the M41. It's no longer a motorway, but it was then, and we had that for a rave, along with with squatters, ravers, huntsabs, who'd all been criminalised by Michael Howard's criminal justice bill, the one that gave us aggravated trespass. We'd all been united in being criminalised by his bill. We all came together and had a splendid party. From there, we kind of got ambitious and decided if we could do sort of 8,000 people on a partying on a motorway, now isn't it time that we took on capitalism directly rather than limiting ourselves to the car? We linked up with the Liverpool Dockers, who were having an amazing strike that had previously been very much ignored by the media, had this fantastic party in Trafalgar Square on a couple of weeks before the 1997 general election. And then a carnival against capitalism, which really seeded the anti-capitalist movement that then ran for several years in other countries, in Seattle, Genoa, wherever the G8 or the World Trade Organization rocked up, there were parties like this. However, in the UK, we were actually on the point of fizzling out. We had what we had lost was that sense of festivity, the police were finding it easier and easier to demonize us as mindless anti-capitalist thugs and all the rest of it. And ultimately, it became harder and harder to maintain that spirit of non-violence, of creating places where children could play. And eventually we fizzled out in 2002 as we became ultimately a more aggressive group, and we lost that sense of creativity that Extinction Rebellion itself replicated so beautifully with the boat in Oxford Circus and the Garden Bridge on Waterloo Bridge. It's worth just saying a bit about what we were saying. This whole what was this link between cars and capitalism? Because I think if we'd spent a little longer talking about the car as the embodiment of what was wrong with capitalism, this thing that takes away the space where children play, that pollutes their lungs, endangers them, that requires military spending to maintain the supply lines of oil that keep the great car economy running, and isn't what comes out of the exhaust pipe of those cars, couldn't one just describe it as the gross national waste product? It really does. It really is a good way of epitomizing what is wrong, the car as a symbol of what is wrong with capitalism. And I think if we'd spent a little longer explaining those sort of messages, we could probably have built greater public understanding of what it is that needs changing or abolishing in capitalism. Anyway, that's who we were. What's its relevance today? Well, as Caspar said, we've actually, subsequent protest movement, Climate Camp, Reclaim the Power, and were incredibly successful actually in influencing the decarbonising of the energy sector. Climate Camp and Reclaim the Power, between them, they tackled coal-fired power stations, they tackled open-cast coal mines, fracking, and the gas power stations that would have gone with that. That has meant that transport is now the biggest emitting sector because it has not been declining. Whereas energy, we've actually been remarkably successful. Not successful enough, but you can see the difference in what's happened with transport compared with energy. So bring us up to date. The current Transport Secretary, he issued 2 documents in March, one of which was called Decarbonising Transport, Setting the Challenge. It's paving the way for a transport decarbonisation strategy at the end of this year. It contains this remarkable phrase, we will use our cars less, but it does mean, so why on earth in the same month did he issue a £27.4 billion spending programme for England's motorways and trunk roads? It is as bonkers as Mrs. Thatcher going to the UN and saying we've got a serious problem with climate change and then launching a £24 billion road building programme. We still have the same discrepancies. He sort of alleviated that kind of mismatch somewhat by kind of issuing 22 billion for cycling and walking, of which 250 million is supposed to be available to spend straight away. But the civil servants are really trying to spend it fast enough. So if we're going to go out spending it reclaiming streets right now, doing it ourselves. There'll be some local authorities who actually really want to do this, but they still haven't got the money. So some local authorities won't get it. We just need to do it. Some local authorities do get it, but we're helping them by getting it done before they've got the money, because otherwise there's going to be a tidal wave of traffic as the government tries to get our businesses working again while people are still socially distancing on public transport. We need to reclaim the streets, and we need to do it now.
And it ties nicely into this weekend's action, which is going out on Saturday to mark the roads and maybe mark some lanes and take the plunge and make the lane where there is some nice solid white lines, delineated cycle lanes. There's possibility to put plungers in there, and then Sunday we're going out on a group ride. Okay, we're going to move straight on to Brenda now, who designed the fantastic parklets just around the corner from where I lived in Tower Hamlets in London. Okay, Brenda.
Hello everyone, I'm Brenda Puech, and I'm really honoured and privileged to be invited by Extinction Rebellion to talk to you. Thank you, Caspar. I was there at the start of Reclaim the Streets along with Roger. I was involved in the M11 campaign. I got sued along with 11 of us for £11 million by the government. I was there for all the street parties. It was a really exciting times. It was really exciting. Now I'm more conventional. I work as a disability access consultant in my day job, and I'm an activist with Hackney Living Streets. And I'm going to talk to you about community parklets as part of my local activism. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Can I just first ask just wondering how many of you have actually heard of parklets? In case you haven't, you may know that the idea started in California, where activists created guerrilla gardens in parking bays for a few hours at the time. And that was in the 1990s. Now you can legally apply for parklets in the US. And there are many in US cities, but it's a very bureaucratic process and they are hugely expensive. So they are few and far between. They are parklets. Well, just let's imagine what streets could be like without parked cars and what they were like without parked cars. And what could parking space be replaced with, whether with more greenery to absorb rainfall, cycle lanes, wider footways. And I think part of the whole range of things that car parking could be replaced with is parklets. Now, I should say that parklets, so they are official parklets that have been built across London, but they're few and far between. This is because they're hugely expensive, about £50,000 to £80,000 each. They're brilliant parklets, but at that price, they are not going to make a dent in the dominance of cars on our streets, parked cars. It's also a very top-down approach. I have always felt that the way forward was a bottom-up, community-led parklet program that would allow us, people, to invest in our public realm in a creative way with minimal local authority input other than some regulatory oversight and guidance. I'm sure we're all aware of the sheer volume and inefficiency of space that parked cars take up on our streets. The figures are mind-boggling. Cars are not in use on average for 96% of the time, which is a hugely inefficient use of road space. Providing parklets is also a question of equity and justice. Car owners get hugely subsidized spaces to park their private property, while non-car owners, the majority in inner London, have no access to this space at any price. As there was no system in place to apply for a parklet, I decided to resort to direct action, this was 3 years ago, to show how a parklet could be created by a resident and how it could potentially transform a street. So therefore, on the 26th of May 2017, I took over a car parking space in front of my home, and I called it the People Parking Bay, with a sign inviting people to park themselves there or their bicycle there. And it was launched by Caroline Russell, a GLA member. She cut the ribbon. And my parklet had cost a few £100 compared to the cost of a council parklet, which I don't deny are very good, but they do cost between £50,000 to £80,000. So within a few days, well, this is just shows what my street was like before and then after the parklet. And unfortunately, my street is now after, because the parklet was evicted and removed. However, the parklet took the neighborhood by storm. I had put out visitor books and 7 of them filled up. It was loved on social media. People used the parking bay as a resting point on their way back from shopping or cycling. Moms used it to feed their babies. Locals watered the plants. One couple had their first date there and said it was the best first date venue ever. Some people left books and it became a mini library. People used the bay as a community notice board. I was proud of how it became a focal point and where you could see complete strangers smiling and talking to each other. It made people happy to be living in Hackney. After 3 weeks, it just lasted 3 weeks, the parklet received an inevitable eviction notice for being a nuisance on the highway. And I set up a petition to allow it to remain, which got nearly 1,000 signatures. However, it was evicted, had to be dismantled, and I moved it to another location nearby on Glyn Road, where it was just as popular. And yeah, it was. So it was dismantled. However, because it was so popular, it was just the sheer volume of support for it. And also the fact that Hackney Council is a progressive council. Hackney Council decided to launch an official community parklet programme a year later with an online application process. That was a huge victory. So I've got a few points of why private interventions or community interventions are so important, how better manageable they are. Well, the first point is, the first good thing about them is that they don't have a car parked on them. They don't have to be financed by the local authority. They're scalable because of the low cost. And then the features of it, if you have seating, allows you to rest on your journey. It allows older people and less mobile people to take long walks. It's a focal point on the street, reducing alienation and loneliness. And of course, it provides an excellent opportunity for greening and visually livening up the street. So yeah, so council launched its program, Community Parklet Program, which is one of the first, well, it's the first one in the whole of the UK. So they had an online application process. They gave a grant of 250 to each applicant. And amazingly, 6 community parklets were built in Hackney within a couple of months. Now, I had nothing to do with the rest of the community parklets. I just did mine because I just wanted to create the process. I wanted to have a system where people could apply for and build their own community parklets, because it just brings variety, creativity, the personal feeling of, or the community ownership of parklets. And one of the parklet creators created this beautiful map of the parklets in Hackney. So, and that's one of the parklets outside, with me sitting on it with Rita Krishna outside their house. That's the community parklet. And this is a note from a note from one of the neighbors about how much they love the Princess Parklet. It's on Princess May Road. It's just a variety of the parklets that's amazing. So the Marcon Place Parklet was a huge planter, and that became the focus of a street party, which would not have happened if the parklet hadn't been there. So it was very successful. That's a commercial parklet that's been taken over by a cafe on Wilton Road, and that's been very successful, and I think is a very successful model. If the council can create a parklet that's then managed by the community, I think that can be quite successful. The Malvern Road Herb Garden has been very successful for a different reason. People come there to pick herbs for their meals. Anyone can come and pick up herbs, and it's very popular. And I think the gardener there got a proposal of marriage because someone was so impressed. So that was interesting. But I'd say that the most successful parklet was the Colveston Crescent one, and it's got huge local praise. One of the local residents, not really a community activist, he just says the size of a single parking space, it makes a gentle but powerful statement and sums up pretty well why I love living in Hackney. So they created a huge seating area with plants around it. And they also created a space where the community could talk about what they wanted from their street. And and so another comment, not sure whose fantastically bonkers idea this was, but there's the world's teeniest park on Colveston Crescent. And so, people talking about the warm, quiet thing that might be happiness, this is what just random people living in the community have said about this little micro intervention. So my parklet, which was dismantled and is now sitting in a shed somewhere, it sometimes reappears when it's borrowed by local activists. Here, Tower Hamlet, the Tower Hamlets better streets for Tower Hamlets, put a pop-up parklet on busy Bethnal Green Road near the city, which was just for a day and very popular just to get the idea out. And this was one set up in Finsbury Park, not really taking up a parking bay, but it was visited by Jeremy Corbyn. And just to finish off, that having parklets or having streets that are free of cars, which is what the ultimate aim is what leads to happiness. And I'll just say that I do think that the Hackney Community Parklet Experiment demonstrates that parklets as part of replacing car parking on our streets as a mini micro intervention can be a catalyst to bring communities together and transform communities as well as streets. So I'll end there. Thank you. Just go down to the last one. Yeah, thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Brenda. That's
okay.
Fantastic. And it's, the contrast between the pictures of London now and the pictures of London then.
Yeah.
Before the wars, there was no cars on the streets, and we desperately need that visioning again now so that we can see how we can live in urban centres in the UK without cars. Cars are a huge problem. Okay, if we can move on to Rosalind now, who stood on a ban private cars platform for the last London mayoral elections and is standing again on a similar platform for the coming elections next year. Okay, Rosalind, over to you.
Yes, I'm Rosalind Redhead. I started a campaign in 2014 called Ban Private Cars in London.com. And it was specifically, I wouldn't have much time when I went out introducing myself. So I thought, it does what it says on the tin. Now, I'm going back to what Brenda was just talking about, the last slide. I mean, I grew up in Sussex in the 60s and early 70s, and there really were no cars then. So I grew up in a space where we were allowed to cycle independently as children. Even under the age of 11 in primary school children, but I visited my friend 8 miles away and back. So we grew up space where, public space, we owned it, and of course people had their chopper bikes, so, we really did own it. And it was a very different kind of lifestyle then. So when, that's always been part of the background of my life, in a sense, in my growing up experience. And I think that when I got to an age where I felt I had some time to really, put my personal energy into campaigning, it was always going to be about cars, because I have seen since that time the destruction of our natural and the air pollution and just children marginalised in their communities, unable to play outside safely, and it's that is distressing to me that we have brought ourselves to that point where people are hemmed in that way. But moving forward a bit, I also decided that I would stand as an independent London mayoral candidate, and very specifically on banning private cars in London, or banning diesel and petrol cars. And at that time in 2016, which was the previous election, I mean, air pollution was really, the main focus. But during the next few years, when Extinction Rebellion started to evolve and there was much more talk about climate change, I certainly saw an opportunity to really start redesigning our streets and becoming, I would say, climate resilient streets, because things have got a lot more serious since the 2018 1.5C report came out. In 2018, we really understood that we were in desperately serious trouble. Now, this means that every residential street, people need to be able to grow food. People need to be able to have an environment, particularly in cities, where, island effect, but that also can happen in small towns as well, and even in villages where there's a lot of concrete. So we have a situation where extreme weather events in towns and cities will start to impact on our lives, and we need to prepared to redesign our streets in a completely different way. So part of my manifesto for what was the 2020, now is 2021, it's been postponed for a year. We're having things like community composts on every residential street, of having space for communities to grow food. And that, that may mean removing cement. We're talking now about, interventions. For instance, if you, at the moment in London, 90% of our rainfall we don't use. Now, why is that really important? It's important for many reasons, but I'll give you a couple that are really, really important in terms of climate. So people may or may not be aware that we get our clean drinking water from a ground source. So when the rain comes down onto into a city or a town, now if you were in the countryside and it's open ground, the rain will be absorbed into the ground, it will go into the ground source. What happens when you have concrete all over, all your streets are concrete and there's very little green space, is that you lose 90% of that rainfall, and it will go somewhere else as flash flooding, it could flood somewhere else, but you do not restore your ground source levels. Now in London, our ground source level is very low. This is happening in cities around the world. I think we saw in Chennai where they had a critical levels of drinking water, and I think it was in Cape Town or in South Africa where they were going down to ground zero, where they literally had no water. So you may think in a city like London that we have lots of spare water, but we actually don't. So if we start removing the cement on our streets, so we're literally getting back down to the soil, not only will we stop the flooding, we'll mitigate the flooding, which could be as extreme, obviously an extreme threat, something that we'll be facing, but also that we will have a secure drinking source, secure source of clean drinking water, which is going to become extremely important as some of the global warming is already baked in. So we know, we saw Paris, for instance, 44 degrees last year, and we saw that how having, a lot of cement, a lot of tarmac can really heat up a city like Paris. Now, Paris is not that far away from London, and of course not that far away from many cities in the UK. So we really need to be redesigning our streets to be resilient to extreme heat, but also that we can all, and I'm talking mainstream, children independent recycling, like I was able to do when I was young. So, visiting their friends, going to school without having to be accompanied by adults. But also everybody can do what the new fashionable thing is, the 15-minute city, so that everything is within 20 minutes of your local environment. So we're not having these long commutes that people get locked into a car use and then have to park them, and then obviously that then takes up the space, and then kids can't play and cycle independently. So these things are all linked, and we really need to up our game on this. Another thing is food security. We have seen with the global pandemic that we're now experiencing that short supply lines are really, really going to be very important. And in terms of food, if we start to see food security issues, and what we've seen with PPE, for instance, I think there's a few things to look into. Are the superullas in Barcelona, what they're doing there? So they're really starting to look at how to redesign their streets in quite a fundamental way. But yes, I think the discussion needs to be to not just at the margins. We need to be going mainstream. We need to take centre stage here. So I think that's really important.
I completely agree with all of that, and really hope that your next mayoral campaign runs successfully as well. Okay, we're going to move on to, we are lucky to have 3 tactical urbanistas here, so we're going to open the floor and listen to them.
So we're the Tactical Urbanistas. We are a group of women who work in the built environment, who were a little bit disenchanted with the way things were going in London after the COVID crisis and the lockdown. And we were seeing responses from so many cities around the world, but nothing yet from London. And at the same time, people were sort of forced into their 20-minute neighborhoods and walking and cycling more, which is great. But the environment that they were doing that in wasn't really fit for social distancing, with like really narrow footways. And we had a dramatic decrease in car use, but at the same time that opened space for more speeding in residential areas. So we wanted to sort of make it safer to walk and be outdoors, and we wanted to do something ourselves as residents and facilitate social distancing, but also highlight this space inequality that exists in our streets, with cars dominating all our streets. So we decided to intervene ourselves, and this is our first intervention on Hackney Road. It's in front of a Tesco's, and we widened the footway where it was quite narrow and where people were queuing, and supermarket staff were sort of loading materials by just putting in some upcycled planters with plants and soil, painted tires, and just brightening up the street. And it received a lot of good feedback and sort of sparked this conversation about how much we need this type of intervention in London. And we also put in some little signs to sort of explain what we're doing and how we're reclaiming the space to widen the sidewalk for people to be able to move around safely. And because that went quite well, we decided to keep going and do more interventions. So our second one was on a residential street where we took up a parking space and put in a planter as well and painted the road. And that was in front of a bike shop. And it made it a lot easier to queue in front of the bike shop safely. And at that time, some councils started to act upon started making it easier for people to move around and social distance and widening pavements and putting in some emergency cycle lanes. And we decided to also tackle these and sort of brighten them up and encourage people to use them and move into the space. And yeah, so what we're trying to do is sort of nudge that conversation that's lacking in a lot of places and encourage people to see this space inequality and act upon it, and also like encourage councils to do more, act bolder and faster, and prioritize more vulnerable people, people who are walking, people who are cycling over cars. And we've taken for granted that cars sort of dominate the streetscape for so long, and there's no time and space for that anymore. We also want to support other groups and residents who would like to do the same, similar initiatives, but don't know where to start, especially groups that are like don't normally get involved in these types of interventions and don't feel empowered to do so, and eventually potentially help councils sort of empower residents themselves to address these issues, similar to what Brenda was talking about, by providing sort of blueprints and the possibility to do these things. Now we'll talk a bit about what we did and how.
So we just wanted to offer a bit of practical advice from, our learned experience from doing this ahead of what you guys are planning at the weekend. And we also wanted to emphasize here, we do work in the built environment. And so when selecting our sites, we do use our professional judgment to make sure that they're safe and appropriate for this sort of thing. So for example, you can see here, the sites we chose were things like an existing parking bay, or where it's already been widened by the council, or next to a loading bay where we know that there is safe room for us to do that in the carriageway without us being at risk working there. Next slide, sorry. So we spend a lot of time discussing what sites we're going to do next, and it does take up a big chunk of the time preparing. So I won't go through all of this. This is a lot of text, but if this is quite useful stuff to keep in mind if you want to take a screenshot, or we'll share this later. But these are the things that we think about when choosing where to go, places that are safe for people to use and for us to install as well. Or that's the two most important things. And then also places that will provide the most benefit, where people are struggling to safely social distance, and where also we want to have a big impact. So ideally somewhere that's got a lot of footfall and lots of people are going to see it. So these are just some quick examples of the sort of thing we're talking about. So narrow pavements where people can't get 2 meters apart. There's so many of those kind of pavements. Streets where you've got people queuing to get into shops and post offices and bike shops as well. There's lots of queues. So places where it can make a real difference. And another thing is, so on the left here, this is a Tesco that we looked at doing an intervention outside of, but it's got a bus stop there, and we don't want to get in the way of other vulnerable users who are, just trying to get about and who need to use the bus. So lots of different things to think about when choosing where is appropriate to do it.
So design considerations when we're actually out doing our interventions, making sure that it's safe for all users, particularly vulnerable users. We've had some feedback from blue badge holders and others with disabilities needing to park in front of areas. So just keeping these in mind when picking your location. We usually go out in the early morning to do our construction. There's less traffic and it's just safer at that time. And then keeping in mind the social distancing guidelines for COVID-19, wearing gloves and face masks. And if you're widening a pavement, it's good to set out the barriers first for your safety. And finally, considering the transportation of all your materials to the site is important. We've been using our bikes or Pedal Me, or doing interventions near our own homes and then just walking with our materials earlier on. So in terms of physical barriers, our interventions so far, we've used planters that we've built ourselves and also old tires that we've sourced from local tire shops. It's good to paint these ahead of time using water-based paints and then getting plants and bags of soil ready to go. Other barrier ideas, which we haven't used yet, but which we hope to in the future, are using pallets to build sturdy planters, or milk crates. And you just want to consider the size of these, making sure they're strong enough to sit in the carriageway, and also paint them brightly or use reflective material or tape to make users aware and cars aware that they're there as well. And in terms of designs, yeah, we just have some fun. It's good to use spray paint to either outline your shapes beforehand, or masking tape works really well to mark out lines and shapes. And stencils as well with cardboard, just cutting out cardboard.
And ask you to wrap up.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yep. Just go into, there's been a question about paint. So yes, water-based paint or acrylic paint dries really fast. And then we usually water down the paint and just put down a white primer layer and then the color over top. And using a roller is quite a bit more efficient than spray paint or brush application. And just finally, here's a list of other essential materials we bring along, just for your reference. And finally, we've tried to create community spaces by adding the signs that were mentioned before and just incorporating the existing footway into our intervention. So it's a space for all. And that wraps it up. We are just on the hunt for a cargo bike or a bike trailer. So if you have any info on someone willing to help out, please get in touch.
Can I just ask you how many of these that you've set up so far?
Yeah, we've done 2 interventions where we've widened the footway ourselves, and then we've done 2 where the council has widened the footway and we've painted inside.
Brilliant.
So 4 in total.
That was an amazing presentation to watch, and I'm really inspired. I'd love to just nip out into my local city here, Exeter, and do just cover the roads in such beautiful colours. Okay, and moving on to the final 8 minutes of presentation from Arlan in Extinction Rebellion Action Planner.
Hello everyone, that was some super inspiring stuff. Thank you for that. Yeah, so what I want to talk about is the action coming up over the weekend. By the way, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Arlan. I'm in the Action Planner Circle in Extinction Rebellion, and I'm also a part of Extinction Rebellion Bristol. So over this weekend, we have a double day of actions. On the Saturday, we're going to create our own bicycle lanes. Roger Geffen has already showed us one way of doing that, which is a personal favorite of mine, of using plungers to create a physical barrier for cyclists to go down. There are lots of other options. You can get paint or spray paint, chalk spray, and create a line for yourself. There are also going to be bike stencils available on the Facebook page for No Going Back, which you will see, and there you can make your own stencil and stencil out bicycles along the road to create the bike lane, which would be very nice for cyclists, very interesting for people to see. They're like, why this bike lane has come out of nowhere? And the more kind of freestyle it looks, the better, really, because it looks like you've done it. It looks like a community action, looks like people did it. So that's also why I like the toilet plungers. And then we'd like to take a picture of it and post it online at Sunday at 9 p.m. because although we are in isolation and we have to act very locally, we are all across the UK who all care about the environment and are all doing these things. So we can connect through the internet that way. Yeah, and then on the Sunday, we have critical mass. And now, of course, you might be thinking critical mass, large gatherings, that's probably not safe right now. But of course, we want people to do it we would advise people do it in a socially distanced way. And the thing about this is that actually opens up a beautiful opportunity for creativity, which is always fun in actions. Creativity is, of course, super important with everything that we've just seen. So some rebels in Bristol had a critical mass on Monday, and they used pool noodles to create a 2-meter thing in between their bikes, which I think was very fun. There are lots of other ways you can do that, rubber donuts. Another favorite of mine is bamboo structures. There were activists in Latvia who were complaining about the space that cars take up in the road compared to cyclists. So what they did is created a car out of bamboo that goes around their bicycle. That's the same dimensions as a car, and it's like a skeleton. So I've made one of these, a kind of miniature version, because I don't quite have the resources to make a big one. And it's actually pretty easy to do if you get bamboo and string and maybe a helper friend. And yeah, it just visually kind of slightly hilarious and gets people in the streets attention. They're like, what is that? And then you get into conversation and engage in the dialogue, which is what this is all about. It's opening up the dialogue for reclaiming the street, reclaiming space, and all that. And yeah, this campaign is called No Going Back for the reason that obviously during COVID, we've seen lots of changes in our life and lots of changes in the world, some of which have a silver lining element, some of which are slightly positive. There are less cars on the streets, there's less pollution in the air, some animals are coming back, and in polluting industries have had to shut down. So we want to say that we don't have to return to the world how it was before, and that we can build something newer, better, and that will actually bring happiness to people and not just do pointless jobs and pointless things just because we have to. And that these are our cities, these are our streets, these are our towns, these are our villages, and they're all here together as a community.
I understand that there are some concerns about social distancing. Interestingly, when the Eye rang me up to talk to me about this action, they were far more interested in the potential dangers created by planters appearing, by inexperienced people putting planters out on the roads. They weren't interested in talking about social distancing, and they actually really got the significance of why it has to be now. And the reporter understood the significance of the COVID-19 crisis and how that ties into the climate and ecological emergency as well. So thank you very much for all of that. And if anybody has any questions, pop some questions into the Zoom chat. I've got one I'd like to start with. So if I can give the panelists a minute or so on the following question, which is, do you think electric vehicles are part of the solution or part of the problem? And I'm going to start with Brenda, who's right next to me.
Right, yes, electric cars. No, I mean, as a general point, no, they're not part of the solution. However, where you need to, as part of a community vehicle program, I think they can be a part. So if they're part of, let's say, like an electric bus or a minivan or a shared taxi, then I think they're only appropriate in those circumstances, but not as a private vehicle. So I don't think private vehicles are appropriate at all.
I would agree, and I'll elucidate on that in a minute, I think. Rosalind, what's your opinions on electric vehicles?
Okay, so Extinction Rebellion wants us to go to net carbon zero by 2025. Paris Agreement 2050. Now, we all individually have a remaining lifetime, the whole of our lifetime, carbon budget of 40 tons. That's for the whole of the rest of life, right? That's part of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
Now, a new electric car is 10 tons that's the least. Some of them are up to as much as 35 tons.
So average is 12 tons.
Yeah, the average is 12 tons. Can you imagine if you take 12 tons of the whole of your remaining lifetime budget of 40 tons, what you're going to be living on? It's completely undoable. The maths just don't add up. And people who are thinking like that have understood those kind of individual carbon budgets. We often talk about carbon budgets in this sort of really abstract, enormous way you can understand. But when you start talking about 40 tons remaining carbon budget that you've got to eat, you've got to heat your home, you've got to decarbonize your home, that you've got to buy clothes, that you've got to travel and what have you, buy a bike maybe, this is just not doable.
I agree. There's 37.5 million cars in the UK. They last 10 years each. So for people that are looking to live 40 years, that's their carbon budget gone. 12 tons per car. Exactly. It's done.
The other thing is, one of the reasons I'm living on 1 ton. So 1 ton is basically net carbon zero. It's ballpark net carbon zero. So Extinction Rebellion want net carbon zero by 2025. Some people want it by 2030, some later than that, 2050. Now, 1 ton per year, you cannot afford to run a car. No. Even public transport is quite carbon intensive. So for a car at the moment will be about 700 grams of carbon per mile. And I have a 2.7 kilogram per day carbon budget. So 700 just for 1 mile out of the 2.7 kilograms. That does not leave me much room to eat well. So even public transport at the moment is about 150 grams per mile. Whereas cycling is 3 grams per mile. Walking is 0 grams per mile. A cycling taxi like Pebble Me Up is 36 grams per mile. So when you're looking at our individual carbon budgets, then cycling is going to be one of the most important means of traveling, and might even have to be for really quite long distance. So you have electric bikes now, so this may enable some longer distance traveling. But most of our lives will have to be local. They'll have to be the 15, 20 minute, where you are able to cycle or walk, and that's backed up by public transport. Because this is basic maths. This isn't kind of abstract compartmentalization. This is really understanding your individual carbon budget. And if you don't know this book, this is written in 2010. It's by Mike Berners-Lee. He's doing this now. He wrote this for a 10-ton carbon lifestyle. The Paris Agreement is for a 2.5 ton by 2030. And then, of course, 1 ton is the net carbon zero. Now, he's doing an update, but if you have a chance, if you can't wait for that to be out, this is still very relevant to a lot of the carbon footprints and will help you understand what a 1 ton of individual carbon budget looks like, and therefore how we need to redesign our public spaces, our streets, to enable that metamorphosis, that transition.
Thank you, Rosalind. Okay, and Roger, what do you think?
Can I just very briefly add some research, some additional maths that's directly relevant to the point? Friends of the Earth commissioned some research on the assumption that we should be aiming for a 2045 net zero. Now, we can debate whether that's the right data or not, but that's the assumption that their research made. On that basis, if we decarbonise both go fully battery electric for our vehicles and fully decarbonize their power supply as quickly as possible, we would still need a 20% reduction in road traffic by 2030 to meet our carbon budgets. If by contrast, we go at the pace that the government expects to go on both those things, on how quickly we go fully battery electric and decarbonising the power supply, then we need a 60% reduction in road traffic. In other words, from that, it's absolutely clear that replacing existing vehicles with electric vehicles is not enough to be on course for our carbon budget. It depends on how insufficient it is, depends on how quickly we decarbonise the power supply and go battery electric. So in short, yes, battery electric vehicles are part of the solution, but they are by nowhere near the whole of it. I hope that's very clear from the maths.
Yes, absolutely. And the reason I wanted to bring this question into this debate was because so frequently we hear all of our politicians from pretty much across all of the main parties talking about electric vehicles being a solution, when I think it's quite clear that nobody here thinks they are. Have the Tactical Urbanistas, have you got an opinion on this?
I guess, yeah, we shouldn't really be planning for electric cars as a replacement for private vehicles. Like, that's not, if they will have a use, it'll be for the sort of very limited number of trips that by car that you can't replace. And that would be definitely not in a private capacity, but more in a sort of shared fleet method. But yeah, we should definitely be planning our cities for active travel and public transport as a priority, and electric vehicles are sort of the last down the line.
Yeah, I absolutely agreed. And, you know, this is all part of why this action is so important now. You know, in increasing safer cycling on the streets, it also increases safety for pedestrians, and it, you know, improves every aspect of our life. It improves the local economy. It improves, as we've seen in Waltham Forest, and as we saw in Brenda's slides. You know, what happened in Waltham Forest is a lot of the local businesses went threw their arms in the air and just said, this is going to ruin our business. And then the cafes and the pubs realised that all of a sudden they could put their covers outside and start to make money from people who weren't actually in their property, and their takings went up. And, you know, there's almost a uniform misinformation from shopkeepers, certainly from local shopkeepers. If you ask them whether people visiting their shop, what mode of transport they turn up on, most people say the majority of people turn up in cars. And when you actually do the stats, most people walk and cycle, walking mostly. And, you know, so shop owners, certainly shop owners in cities outside of London, you know, extra. I've lived in London for 25 years, and I'm from the West Country, so I'm quite experienced at both. And shopkeepers in Exeter just do not understand. A lot of them just do not understand that people are capable of shopping without using a car. You know, and this is hugely important. And if we take that into consideration, then we need to be, you know, if we really want to be talking about zero carbon 2025, then we should be genuinely talking about spending £60 billion on transport in the UK. And by doing that, we would be also talking about removing virtually all private cars, electrifying public transport systems, and creating livable cities where everybody can walk to wherever they need, to everything they need within 20 minutes. And all of these things have been touched upon a little bit in this webinar at the moment. Arlan, do you just want to, have you got any opinion on electric vehicles?
A very brief one is that I think what's beautiful and simple about emphasis on a bike over electric car is that there's often, when the climate crisis is brought up, a lot of people want to emphasize and put lots of faith in advancing technology, that like this will solve all our problems, we don't have to change our lifestyle, and we'll just wait for technology to get better. Whereas, of course, as we all know in this call, that that's not the case, and that we do need to change our lives, and that it can be simple and it can be easy, and we don't have to wait for more and more efficient electric cars. We can just walk more and cycle more.
Yeah, exactly. And as Roger has just pointed out, the studies that show people shopping by various modes of transport show that people walking and cycling spend less money, but visit the shops more frequently. So it depends. You know, they spend less per visit, but more over a length of time because they visit more frequently as well. Okay, we just Rosalind, you had your hand up.
I saw a question just come up. Sorry, I'm not sure who it was from because I missed that, but some about people who are not able-bodied. Now, one of the things that has been really exciting in London has been the sort of emergence of cycling taxis. Now, these really do provide an amazing way of. I think Pedal Me Up is 36 grams per mile, and also we have pedicabs as well. So there are lots of different designs of cycling taxis, but these can really provide some very interesting solutions. And there's also cycling without age, which is becoming I'm a Danish sort of enterprise, but now they're spreading across the UK. So they have cycles that also will pick up people and sort of enable people to have the cycling experience with not necessarily cycling. And so I think it's an interesting area for that.
Okay, so thank you very much, Rosalind. Yes, the disabled people cycle at the same proportion as able-bodied people do, and we would encourage everybody here to get involved in the actions going on this weekend. The critical mass starting at 2 o'clock in your location on Sunday, and you need to speak to your local groups to find out where the tactical urbanism and street painting that's happening on Saturday is. Thank you very much to the panel for turning up and speaking and giving us your incredible knowledge and beautiful presentations about tactical urbanism and stuff. And thank you very much. And we shall see you at the next Reset TV.